I'd now like to introduce you to the Laval Farm Operations Manager, Rowan Galloway, who is our chair for this next session. He's our business manager at Laval, and he's had 3 years there. Prior to that, he was at Assure Quality, looking at red meat inspections and biosecurity, and he's based in the mighty Hamilton. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Good morning, everybody. Hope you had a reasonable evening last night, and for those that oversubscribed or over-networked, I hope this is a pretty tolerable session for you. About Laval, we're a global milking machinery company, and we specialise in, supplying milking equipment and associated equipment for all dairy production systems. We're part of Laval, which also encompasses the processing and packaging company Tetra Pak. And in New Zealand, we're represented by a dealer network of around about 30 independent business partners throughout the country in most dairy production areas. In terms of our sheep milking assortment, we go really from the cluster right through to collection in terms of at the vat, and also have associated things. So both small and large scale, we do bucket milking, or essentially mini milkers as they're called these days, right through to very large scale 120 point milking systems. This session about farm operations, you're going to hear today about business analysis, breeding, feeding, animal husbandry, and operational scope. Yesterday we heard from Diane and Scotty. They were telling us about the very important value that can be created by getting your messaging right, telling your story, creating value, and really knowing your market. The caveat though from Diane was that you really had to follow through the quality of your product. That's what farm operations is really all about. Quality of the product, what you're doing next to the processing. Quite a few variables in that can go wrong. You're dealing with different challenges on a day-to-day basis, and these things will all underpin quality. Get it wrong and you'll quickly erode or even lose that value. So our first speaker today is Andy Gunson. Andy comes from Waifari in the Hawke's Bay. Now, I only met Andy last night and Kat, and I asked Kat who makes all the operational decisions on farm. Kat said, oh, that's pretty easy. That's Andy. Andy makes all the big decisions. For some reason there doesn't seem to be any. So Andy, I'll invite you to the stage to tell us about your business. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Is that pointer? How you doing? I'm Andy Gunson. I'm a mechanical engineer, and I'm kind of a weekend warrior farmer, if you like. My wife, Kat, she's a physiotherapist, but she also has taken to sheep milking and farming. So, Waifari, that's where we are. It's a dry climate. We are in sort of what would be called a rain belt, but yeah, typically that rain is at the wrong time of year. Last year I did a talk about our production and our farming system, and I guess this talk's going to be a bit of a counterpoint to Ham's discussion before about very intensive systems. We're more at the other end of the scale, trying to have a low cost pasture based system with minimal input, and that's not traditional by any means. It's just because we're finding our way, if you like. So what I'm going to talk about, changes from our previous season, what we have endeavoured to do to increase production to match our milk quality and our milk composition to the products that get manufactured at Origin Earth, who's our partner. I'm going to talk about lamb production, I'm going to talk about our milking performance, and then if we've got time at the end, some questions. So just a bit of background about us. We're in year 4 of a pilot, basically. So Kat and I set out 10 years or so ago to start breeding a milking sheep. 4 years ago, we signed a contract with Origin Earth, basically locking in some financial arrangements, commercial arrangements. We and sole supply. We are tiny, really tiny. We're 5 hectare platform. We winter off on a 14 hectare block, 20 minutes down the road. We run 2 separate flocks of a crossbred, what I'd sort of term as an Eastlander. So it's a East Frisian crossed with a Highlander maternal breed from Focus Genetics. The lambs at this stage, they're on mum for approximately 5 weeks before we start to milk them. And we're a very small 10 stall milking shed. So our system changes. We basically have had drummed into us, so the last 12 months, data, absolute attention to detail. If you want to really know what's going on your milking flock, then yeah, collect, collate, analyse. Being a mechanical engineer, okay, that's fine, I can do that. But what's happened is, even with a small flock of several hundred ewes, we are just getting totally swamped with data. So flock testing has been a massive eye-opener for us. 3 years of milking, we thought we actually knew what we were doing, thought we knew what we were looking at, thought we understood what was coming out of the ewes' udders, and yeah, it was a crock, basically. Ewes that looked like they were pathetic and hopeless were sort of showing themselves up to be high-performing. Other ewes that had massive udders, good-looking teats, and what appeared to be good letdown were costing us a lot of time and money for the dismal amount of milk that they were providing. System changes, so we're moving away from grass. Grass has been a disaster for us, ryegrass, some of the other types of grasses we've tried. Quality isn't there, the energy isn't there, so our property is less and less like a traditional sheep and beef farm. We essentially are running legumes and herbs. Wintertime, we're basically running the ewes on a diet of Swedes and whatever else they can pick up off the headlands. But again, the focus being on energy input. In the shed, we upped our pulsation rate. We added a couple more positions because we thought we'd have some more numbers. And we wanted to reduce our time in the shed. We bumped our pulsation rate up to 180 pulses per minute. And like I said, we went on a program of measuring and recording. So this is some of what I was talking about in our system. So lambing, basically a week out from lambing, the ewes will leave the Swede crop and they'll be lambed on a plantain clover mix. One of the issues we have with recording is this sort of carry on. So twice a day, our lambing beat, we're basically out there trying to catch, mark, record, weigh. And when you end up with this situation, that compromises your data somewhat. 5 lambs, 2 ewes, who's a who's. And yeah, this is these animals are basically, just on the drop. So just some comparison data. So last season we had some sort of mystery issue with our lambing, where we had quite a disappointing lambing at 145%, so that's from tupping through to weaning. This season we were closer to what our long-term lambing percentage tupping to weaning would be like. Second flock, so we run a second flock that lambs November-ish, and that has traditionally for us has been made up of young stock, and this year, yeah, we saw quite a pickup in performance from those girls as well. Average birth weight this year was actually a significant improvement. It doesn't seem like it, 0.2, but it was really noticeable. And our lambs are out of there. Our ram lambs are out of there a lot earlier. Our lambing window, 22 days, was actually really, that's based on the way that we have been managing our tupping. So that's just, again, it's a labour input requirement for Kat and I. The shorter we can get that period, the better. So this is without any synchronisation or anything like that. But we weren't that happy with prices this year. So as you can see there, we sort of took a $20 hit on our store lambs, but you know, we didn't feed them an awful lot in our 60 days to get them to that point. And maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. I think what the previous presenters sort of said around feeding of ewe lambs, we might even be able to get our ram lambs pumping even a bit more if we're putting the pressure on the ewe lambs a bit more, because this was across both ewes. The average daily gain was across both ewes and ram lambs, so I'm thinking we might be able to save 150 grams a day on our ewe lambs and pump our ram lambs along a bit faster. So onto milking, so our flock performance. So what you'll see here is this is our lambing date. The lambs are with mum through this period. Essentially the lambs are left behind on the wintering off block. The ewes come back to the milking block. So we had, again, remember that we made a big change with our pasture through the following sort of autumn and winter. So these ewes were basically going on to subclover plantain. That was of significantly higher quality than what the grass species would have been like the previous year. One thing I've marked on here is, we also recorded significant rain events because we're an extensive system. The ewes are outside, and I tend to go away for consulting work when it rains, and my wife gets stuck with milking day and night in those conditions. And so, the troughs in our at these points, I'm not saying that it's explained by it, but I'm just saying at that point we had something like 250 mils of rain over 3 days. We also had significant rain at those 2 points, shearing off the back of the platform, and then dry off day is basically a point where we start bringing in our second flock. So these are animals that we're substituting for poor performers, if you like. And then, we ended the season in February with a lot of feed, but we also have some issues with some of the products that we're trying to manufacture and the composition of the milk at that time of year, which means that for the amount of effort of milking twice a day, it actually starts to become not really worthwhile pursuing milking after that point. So milk performance this year, we were thinking a bit that we would run a few more animals, but the data record actually ended up with us going, geez, there's a heap of turners in this mob. By turner I mean they're consuming a lot of feed and turning a lot of stuff out that's not milk. So just to explain a little bit about what's going on here. So last season, over pretty much the same time period, off our 5 hectares, we were 15,400 litres. This season, we're 16,577. Again, I can't explain. All I can tell you is what we've changed environmentally. Surely there are differences between the 2 years, but a big change from a grass pasture-based system to a legume-based system. The real interesting thing for us was the ewe days milked. So basically, what I'm talking about here is when the cups have gone on to a ewe. So 11,000 times the previous season, the cups went on to a ewe. This season, 10,000 times. Our average daily performance changed significantly. Again, it's just about feeding, I feel. And we had a 9% reduction in the amount of effort that we had to put in to get that milk out. What the testing sort of meant, and was kind of unexpected for us, was we actually had a real heavy cull right through the season. Basically every test day we went, oh man, you're gone, you're gone, you're gone. So yeah, what it meant is that we actually probably had the capacity to feed more ewes, but they just weren't available. We just hadn't tupped enough during the season. So yeah, that's the identify and dry off. So just a little bit on our performance. So this season, every 4 weeks, we were measuring yield, composition, somatic cell count. We were also identifying ewes which had high somatic cell counts, and also taking that milk off and actually trying to see if we could figure out what the bacteria was that was giving us that issue. All of them came back with nothing. So we had high somatic cell counts, but the bacteria was not able to be identified or even anything grown in the lab. So I've got some serious questions about somatic cells. And we also spent a hell of a lot of time looking at letdown characteristics of our particular animals and our particular system. And the other thing, which was kind of drummed into us by people with much more letters behind their name than me, was concentrate on the efficiency of your animals. So weight gain right through the fertility and production cycle. We were basically looking at the ewe's weight right through tupping, scanning, weaning, and then monthly through the milking season. This is probably going to be a little bit hard to interpret, but essentially this is our population of ewes at a certain period of days in milk, and that's average days in milk for the flock. So as you can see, the turners are at this end, and the high-performing ewes, or maybe not high-performing, but the ewes that have high milk yield at that particular time, at the other end, and then the average of the mean of the population somewhere in there. As time goes on, so our season ran through for 193 days. That population has shifted. Sure, it's been altered by us taking animals out, culling animals, bringing new animals in. But this is just a representation of what our population of ewes did in terms of yield. But we also have, I could have like 12 of these different reports for the other different traits. But it's not really, it's just more to give, an idea of what the population is doing. So, yeah, that's our season in a nutshell. And I'll take any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you, Andy. Does anyone have any questions out there?
My name is Michael Ritson-Thomas. First question is why 2 flocks, and how do you work the 2 flocks?
Yeah, okay, thanks, Michael. So we have a very strong relationship with our, essentially our manufacturing partner, if you like, and she has quite, I wouldn't say demanding requirements on what the milk needs to look like, but yeah, together we're both focused on basically producing the highest quality raw milk that we can, so she can turn it into something very nice and worth a lot of money at the other end. We have identified a number of products that we make that we just cannot make at certain times in the lactation curve. So our objective over the next however many years it takes is to start to fill in those gaps. Our method of solving that so far is to have a second flock of early lactation ewes coming in, which essentially overlaps the ewes that are in later lactation. And that has an effect of altering the protein to fat ratios, of altering what milk Janie is having to deal with. And we've found at certain proportions we start to actually get the milk back to where it needs to be to manufacture certain products. And we will keep doing that, and we'll probably extend that to try and to get to a year-round supply.
All right. Another one over here.
Sorry if I missed it, but how many sheep do you have?
There's how many sheep we have, and then how many sheep
Or
we
how
milk.
many sheep are you milking?
So this season we were milking about 75 ewes.
Anything further for Andy at all? Over here. Thank you.
Andy, did you find any issues of heat stress in your ewes? You're in quite a hot area of the country, although this year it might have been so bad. But have you experienced heat stress in the ewes?
Yeah, absolutely. Once the temperatures get up and when they're in paddocks that we actually can't provide shelter, that's the sort of decision point for our sort of second shearing, if you like, the second shear. So we also the East Frisians' ears and nose and eyes are all really susceptible to sun, as you know. So we have a fair bit of cancer eye issues. We have ear problems. So we've actually been trying to get animals that do have hairy ears that will be able to cope with those conditions. But first thing we try and do is have shelter in the paddock. Yep.
And one other question. You're weaning at, I think it was 5 to 6 weeks. What influenced the decision to do it for 5 or 6 weeks versus maybe something earlier or different?
Yeah, we're all about trying to make life simple for ourselves, because I've got a day job. After 7:30 I'm off doing engineering stuff and then try and make it back for 4:30 milking, right? So we essentially try and get the lambs to about at least 18 kilos on average for our weaning. Every year we try and cut a few days back, cut a few days back, cut a few days back. This year we found with lambing on plantain clover, those lambs didn't, like if you look at, we do about four weights from birth up to weaning, and we didn't see the same, we saw better growth rates then, but even after weaning, once the ewes were taken off, we didn't see as big a check as what we would normally have seen. So yeah, it's obviously we're throwing money away by using the ewe to rear the lamb, but so far that's what's been necessary to run this pilot operation, if you like.
All right. Thank you very much, Andy. Everyone please thank Andy for his contribution. So operations is about efficiency. Diane Ray, I will invite you back to the stage. No introduction necessary. She spoke to us yesterday, so operational efficiency at its best.
I love this session. I love talking sheep. Okay, so let me give you a very brief history of Grandview and... Sorry. Terrible, I walk everywhere. Thank you. Can everyone hear me now? Great. So, brief history of Grandview and dairy sheep. So, you might have heard yesterday I've got 3 degrees, none of them in sheep. So, we thought we'd start a dairy sheep group. That was great, and what we did is we found some East Frisians, whichever you want to call them, from a very good breeder in Tasmania. Foot rot free, yonis free, lovely animals. Most of them were 3/4 Friesland. We had a couple of 7/8s. We had a couple of pures because the breeder, who is a very good sheep breeder, said, you know what, I'll give you the pures because you will be able to look after them better than I can. I've had problems with the pures, which is why most of my flock is 3/4. The other quarter was Dorset, by the way. he was wrong. um, we thought in the beginning it was because we were really lousy sheep farmers because we knew nothing about raising sheep. In fact, we were lousy sheep farmers because we knew nothing about dairy sheep. And then, to make matters worse, we had East Frisians. And on top of that, we were certified organic. Okay, so, you know, I always like a challenge. The biggest part of that challenge was the East Friesland. So we dealt with the issues of East Frieslands, which we thought we were killing them because we're really lousy sheep farmers. And then fortunately, we started in 2002. In 2004, I got a bursary from being Real Woman of the Year. God knows why, because I really wasn't a good farmer. But I got this bursary, 15 grand, to go around the world. And I went around the world and looked at, you know, people in Ireland and England and Europe and Holland, Germany, and about dairy sheep. And I came back with their byline, East Frisians love to die. And that was the byline given to me by the Irish guys. No, East Frisians, they love to die. So I thought, what the hell are we going to do? I mean, how are we going to deal with this? We were getting squam cell carcinomas, probably in a flock of 100. We'd have, you know, 6 or 7 a year. And they grow on the ears, so that was fine. We cut the ear off, and it stopped the squamous cell carcinoma. The farmer we got the Frieslands from did a serious docking of the tail. I mean, everything was exposed. So you can't do much when you've got them on the vulva. You start cutting things off there, and you've got problems. So, and then we'd have them on the eyes, on the eyelids here. And then we'd have them on the lips. And it's like, what the hell are we going to do? So I was fortunate to have a group of women. Just remember yesterday, I kept saying, if you do relationship marketing, the world comes to you. And I've had so many amazing opportunities drop on my doorstep. And I'm saying to these women, these sheep are a drama. We can't increase our flock because we keep killing them. You know, the lambs die. The mums, once they get there, aren't so bad. But, you know, we can't increase our flock size. They've got really bad lungs. We get a hot day in Tassie, and in Tassie we'll go maybe straight into a 31-degree day and then back to a 22-degree day the next day. The Frieslands just drop over. They get pneumonia on a hot day. They get pneumonia on a cold, wet day. I kept saying they've got lousy lungs. They just love to get pneumonia. And this was a group of homeopathic female vets on my doorstep. And they said, 2 things you need to do is you need to find a sheep with strong lungs. I said, yeah, well, that's great. But Australia only has these Friesians. You know, for these reasons, we can't import anything into Australia. The other thing you need to do is don't be so nice with your runts. Runts need to go. And these are homeopathic vets telling me this. And we went, yeah, but we like to give everyone a chance. Anyway, so 2 bits of advice. And I said, look, the Awassi are amazing. They're the 2nd largest dairy breed in the world. And in fact, now I'd probably argue that they're in fact as equal to East Frisians in terms of production. And Jaime, thank you so much for that data, which shows that they're a highly productive animal. But we can't have any. They're in Australia, but they're held by Awassi Australia, and the genetics are closely held, and no one can get them out. And she said, yeah, my neighbour's got some. I said, no, I'm talking Awassi here, you know, floppy. Yeah, my neighbour's got some in Queensland. Really? And she said, but he's about to take them to the slaughterhouse because he's got mostly merinos. They've been in drought for a couple of years. He loves these guys, but, you know. So I said, what's his name? So I found this guy and said, he said, yeah, I've got them. And I won't bore you with the story, but it was an amazing situation where they actually were legal. We weren't going to have Awassi Australia knocking on our door saying they're our genetics. In fact, they were, but through legal reasons, they had ignored these genetics. And this guy had just kept the flock going, and he had about 120 of them. They were skin and bone. He sent me photos. They were less than anorexic, these poor little things. And he said, I love them. That's why I haven't killed them to now, because they're a very personable animal, the Awassi. They lived with the Bedouins for eons, so they're used to following humans. So it's in their DNA to connect with us. Yeah? They're just beautiful animals. And so he said, I said, well, can I buy them? He said, yes, but, you know, here's the photos and, you know, they're skin and bone and we've been in drought. But what I'll do is I'll select the best ones out of the group for you and I'll fatten them up and I will drive them myself down to Melbourne, which he did. They were getting loosened and he fattened them up and he put them on his own truck and he drove them to Melbourne. And we had our livestock guy pick them up and deliver them. Now, they came to the farm in the middle of winter. No one had had a wassie in Australia in the middle of winter. These are desert animals, so we all think, you know, they're going to be great in the dry heat. And they are. They're exceptional in the dry heat, and I'll go through why in a minute. But they arrived and we thought, ooh, how are they going to cope with Tasmania's cold, wet winters? So in the shed, we had the freezers at the time because remember I said that we had to build the sheep Hilton. Let me see if I can get this the right way around this time. Yay, yay. Before I get to the sheep Hilton, these are your disadvantages, which we all know and love, of the East Frisian. Prone to pneumonia. They get distressed when the temperature exceeds 28 degrees centigrade. They're prone to squamous cell carcinomas on eyes, ears, vulva due to the pink skin. They perform poorly in cold, wet, windy conditions, and it's a slow growth of lambs. I'll get to that in a minute. So, we had dramas with the East Frisian. So what did we do? We had other issues because they had so much volume of milk that we had, I think, about 3 that unfortunately had herniated their abdomen, and you know the rumen fell into the other area, and so on and so forth. So this girl was going to have that problem. So I thought, well, you know, I thought we're human. We put a bra on her. So I went out to the local St. Vinny's de Paul, found the biggest old grandma's bra I could find. And you can see she's a little disgusted with this. But then we had a lady working for us whose name was Barbara, and she was an Aries, and she milked our sheep. Very sad. So she invented what we termed the bar bra. So she went to, and she developed this thing with Velcro, so we now put it on the sheep, those girls that are a bit susceptible, of which there's now about 1 or 2 a year. One's called Grandma's Tits, the other's called Big Tits. And we can actually flick it open and milk them and so on. So we had all these issues with the East Friesians, and we do think outside the square. So we're trying to get creative with these bloody sheep. So came back from my first visit and decided this is what I had to build to keep these East Friesians alive. So 100 grand later, I then had to mortgage my daughter, I think my firstborn, to get the money out of the bank and build the sheep Hilton. So that was our solution. So at the time that the Awassi arrived, we had the girls in the shed, the East Frisians in the shed. We divided it so that they were on the right and the Awassi were going to come in on the left. The truck came in, opened the gate, out came these amazing animals, and he said to me, you won't, this is a real cocky Tasmanian guy, you won't bloody believe it, Di, but there's a little bugger in there too. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, one was born on the way, and he couldn't believe the fact that this little one, which was a ram lamb, was actually born on the water on the way over, and the boat coming across from Melbourne is a bit rugged, and so they try and keep the sheep tight so that there's not too much movement for them. And he said, I've never seen one born and survive the trip because they get trampled. And he said, you should have seen how these girls looked after this little baby. So very cute. So we had the Awassi arrive. The first thing I noticed is that they ate 1/3 less food than my little Friesian mates. Frieslands love fillet steak, you know. The Awassi are quite happy with sausages. And not only that, out of the sausage they will make meat, they'll make milk, and they don't make a whole lot out the other end. Their body is so efficient that whatever goes in the mouth is utilised. And what they don't need goes into the tail. So it's a fat tail breed. The tail is there for a purpose. It absorbs all the extra nutrient, and as Homie said, at times when they're under distress, you can smell the ketosis. It smells like liver. So if we have that smell, we know we need to start increasing their feed. That's not very scientific, but that's what we do. So they keep that tail for, those extra times when the food's not around. Frieslands don't have that ability. So what do when things get lean and tough? They just die. So I then had to collect, do an egg test. So I needed 10 separate piles of feces to do this test from. I was flat out finding 10 separate piles out of this group of 45 Awassi ewes with, I think we had about 5 rams. Very efficient. And that was when I suddenly figured out that, you know, I'm putting high volume in these guys on this side, and I'm getting high volume out as well. And this side I'm putting in low volume, and I'm actually getting low volume out as well. So very, very different straight away. The Awassi are a drought-tolerant breed. That's where they come from. For centuries, they've been a Bedouin group of. They originated from Iraq. They lived in the Middle East. Fantastic. They're drought-tolerant. But in the desert, it's very cold of a night. Right? The desert is not wet. Funny that. Yeah, I know a lot. So that was the issue with us. It's like, all right, I figured that they'd probably deal with the cold and they'd deal with our heat easily. Tassie's not that hot most of the time. But what about the wet? And that was something that had never been trialled. Second highest milking breed in the world, and they are browsers, not grazers. Browsers, not grazers. They are more like a Boer goat. We let our little ones out of the shed. We have our little lambs ewes and little ram lambs in the shed to have some silage overnight. Let them out in the morning back to the paddock. And we've got this really horrible little thistle weed that just grows with runners under the ground. And as they're going along the path, they're having a little nibble on the weed. They eat gorse. They eat blackberry. They love the bark of the peppermint gum tree. They actually love peppermint gum leaves too. So what they're doing is that they have learnt to source out their mineral requirements and their other nutrient requirements from something that's not grass. They eat grass too, strangely enough. But they don't need rye and clover. In fact, they don't do that well on rye and clover. As soon as our summer comes in, so we tend to lamb down sort of August-ish, and it's always ish on our farm how we do things. So we're lambing down in August, we milk them through, we've got rain, the grass grows, and then come December we have no rain in Tasmania. We have a dry summer. So whatever grass and rubbish is left becomes what I call standing hay. That's when we see the increase in their milk production. Okay, really interesting. Like the Frieslands, suddenly we've got a problem. We're having to pump more nutrient into them, you know, more of the lucerne, more of the green stuff. But the Awassi are going, well, you know, the last few months with this green lush grass, it's been okay. But really now we're coming into our own. So an amazing, amazing animal. Love them to bits. Natural protection against hot weather. They're adapted to cold weather as well, as I said. Now, rapid growth of lambs. We, in 2007, we just got the Awassi on the farm about 2006. I was fortunate to be involved in a Churchill Fellowship, which gave me some more money to go around the world. So this time I actually went and did some work in Israel. And I love the work they're doing. They worked with a group called Ein Harod. Spent some time with a gentleman at the university who was responsible for sourcing one of the Awassi intakes into Australia that came via New Zealand, which is where you get your leakages. The other lot of Awassi actually came from Turkey into Australia, but Elisha was the one responsible for choosing the genetics from the group that came in from Israel. It's very important to know because they are dairy sheep genetics. Now, Awassi, there is a meat breed and there is a dairy breed. And Israel have been doing all of the work for the last 40 or 50 years on what's called the improved Awassi, which is the dairy breed. And you need to know the difference, which you will know very soon. Rapid growth of lambs. These lambs hit the ground running and then they take off. And I'll show you photos of that with the Friesen lambs very soon. To the extent where we wean at 4 weeks of age. So we've changed over to basically the French system. We have lots of other things we do in our lives. So we've gone through I had a de Laval automatic lamb feeder, which I was going to marry, because I went from bottle feeding to that, and it was amazing. But we had East Frieslands on it, and they all drank, and that was fine, and then they loved to die. So they were dying at 3 or 4 weeks of age, which magically was when they'd had 2 or 3 days on their mum, so they'd had the colostrum. It was magically when their own immune system started to try and kick in. So that's when they loved to die. So what I did is I developed a market with the local chefs, and I was taking these little tinies at 3 weeks of age to our local abattoir, and they were killing them and putting them in a cryovac bag, and they looked like a giant rabbit. Right? And the chefs were wetting themselves with this thing, this product. I figured that they were going to die on me anyway, and I'd already put 3 weeks of milk powder into them, so that was my solution. As I said, we've tried everything. So when we got the Iwasi, because of the labour time in teaching the lambs to feed and et cetera, and you know, we've got wage costs of, the minimum wage is $21 an hour in Australia, so it's stupid. So what we did then is we recognised that these Iwasi lambs grew very quickly, and literally at 4 weeks of age, they're self-sufficient. So we wean them exactly at 4 weeks of age. We've gone through testing. Is it by weight? No. It seems to be, and again, this is intuitive, and Homie would probably back me up on this. Their rumen system is ready for grass. I mean, they graze with their mum, so they're used to her concentrate and feed. But at that 4 weeks of age, their body no longer needs to metabolize the milk. It's ready for dealing with the grasses. And so at exactly 4 weeks of age, whether there's this big or this big, they get weaned. And mum becomes a working girl. So the bubs get the first 4 weeks, and we get the next sort of 6 or 7 months. We dry off, usually, we've just dried off literally last week, so we usually dry off about mid-March with the girls. So rapid growth of lambs. They're weanable at 4 weeks of age. And the milk itself, we've done testing of the milk when we had Frieslands and we had Iwasi. We wanted to see what the differences were in the milk, thinking that the Iwasi milk might taste a bit weird, being that they're from, you know, somewhere that we don't know. And in fact, the Iwasi milk, when we did a blind tasting with customers of the raw milk, which is actually illegal, but we did, they prefer the Iwasi milk because it actually is sweeter than the East Friesland milk, and it's creamier. This is a palate response. It's sweeter and it's creamier. The scientific response is it's actually higher in solids than the East Friesland milk. If you assume East Friesland's like a black and white cow, as opposed to Iwasi, which is like a Jersey cow.
Yes, we can, thanks.
So this is the little East Friesland lamb that we had as a throwback from Grandview Dairy Sheep this year, and these are her little friends. These are all girls. Ear tag on the right. So can you see the difference? The little Iwasi have got a lot more hair. The Iwasi have the ability to hold air against their body. They hold, I think it's like 50 litres of air in summer, which provides a buffer for the climate. They will reduce their pulse rate. And if anyone wants to talk about all this data with me later, give me a yell. They reduce their pulse rate in hot weather. They don't pant to the same extent that all of our other tasty sheep pant and woolly sheep pant. This is the East Friesian girl and the Iwasi girl. That was one of our originals, I can tell by her ear tag. They're just cutest little things ever. Difference, dairy sheep Iwasi will go up on the back. See how the haunch is higher? And in Holmes' photos, they were there as well. They go up at the back. A dairy sheep ram will go up at the haunches as well. And a meat ram will go down. Can you see how that ram slopes down? And their tail, the meat ram tail, holds more fat in it than the dairy sheep tail. So there is a difference in the genetics, and you need to know that difference. And that's our dairy sheep girls. We've created Grandview Dairy Sheep out of that whole journey. We love the ASAF, but the ASAF udder was a bit of a drama in machine milking, so we decided if we were going to create a breed, we'd figure out the udder shape and conformation for machine milking. So essentially our blend is East Frisian and Awassi, but we have a few other secret herbs and spices to make sure that machine milking works. So that's what the Grandview dairy sheep looks like. That's a little boy in the front, obviously, and the girls at the back. And that's it from me. So the take-home message: look at Awassi. Awassi are an amazing animal, and you can get genetics from Australia. You can, and I think you've got some genetics here in NZ as well.
Thank you, Diane. Sorry for having to cut you short there. We'll take one question only. If you'd like to catch up with Di, please do so during the lunch or afterwards. Has anybody got over here? Righty.
Hi, I'm Adrienne Staples, South Wairarapa. With the ASIFs, you said there was a problem machine milking them. We have sourced East Frisian ewes and we have some Awassi rams, so I'm curious to understand what the problem is, please.
I don't know whether you noticed the slides that Home had, but most of them over there, and certainly at Einharod, use what's called a sagi hook, because it's quite a teardrop-shaped udder, and the nipples are not at the bottom of the udder, so there's sort of a component there below the nipples that you're not milking out. So they've got this sagi hook that lifts up the udder so that you've got your two separate sections and it points down. But there is time taken in grabbing the udder and getting the sagi hook and putting it on. So I just figured, if I'm going to start from scratch, then I may as well look at udder conformation and ligament attachment. Ligament attachment in the Awassi is excellent anyway.
All right, always great to see such passion. Thank you very much for your contribution, and if you give her a round of applause. Okay, moving right along. Liz and Dave Clayton are going to present next. They come from the Wairarapa. They've been dairy sheep milking for a little time now. They also have a son who's moving on into the industry and works with the guys at Spring Sheep Dairy there. Liz and Dave are going to talk about one of life's unavoidable topics. Welcome.
Morning. My name's Liz Clayton and I'm an alcoholic. Wrong presentation. Liz, just pull that closer to you. Right. I'm going to do what everybody else done, is says, please work for me. Top button? No. Middle button. Okay, go back. Right. We only started this year. God, I feel lost behind here. We only started this year, so it's our first season milking. And it was extremely expensive to get off the ground. And we were all set to go, and we went, resource consent for effluent discharge. We'll get onto it. Don't do that. Start early. So I'm just going to go over the consent process, the rules. We're in the Greater Wellington Regional Council area. What our system is, we heard yesterday about some of the sheep effluent characteristics. I'll talk about the costs, which were really scary, and then I guess I get a bit preachy because it's really what's important to us and going into the future. So the resource consent process, really important. Do your homework first. The application to regional gets started early, and the council people that we worked with were absolutely fabulous. For all the moans and groans and stabbing myself in the eye some nights, I just had to give them a call and they would talk me through some of the material. You can do most of it yourself. It's online, it's available, and Dave and I have set up a Facebook page. So every time we find something useful or that you'll need, it's on our Facebook page. It does take a bit of time, but it is doable. So the rule in the Greater Wellington Regional Council is you can't put any more than 150 kgs of nitrogen a hectare per year. On our farm, with our system, we're less than 1,000 litres of effluent, and that includes 2 kilograms of solids. The dairy yard area, and just to We milked 62 sheep this year. The dairy yard area has 65 metres squared, full water diversion, and off a dirty yard we get about 650 litres. So it's not big. Our system, we've got 3 sprinklers. They're Funa flash, they look amazing. We've got up to 30 metre spread with 20 psi, and the nitrogen applied is about 18 kilograms per hectare per year. So nothing like what the Greater Wellington Regional Council have as a limit. So here's our setup. The Sabre pump, I nearly had to mortgage again for that one. The Satori sprinklers, the good thing about the pump, it's an auger, so even if you've got wool and rubbish and bits and pieces in it, it just pushes it out. We've got a 10,000 litre tank, and to get our resource consent, we actually had to buy another 25,000 litre tank, and that's because you've got to have the effluent going into something that can store in case there's a tsunami up the Wainoni River, or, you know, we have 200 days of rain, or it was, stab self in the eyes again. So the picture at the top on the right is of the sprinklers going. We've got 3 sprinklers, and it's really cool to see it go. But it only takes a bloody hour and it's finished. So I think the thing with the councils will be, it's got to be horses for courses. And I did have a few of those discussions. Right. You've heard yesterday in much more in depth the nutrient values when compared to cows are considerably lower. We've got a much better environmental footprint than a dairy farm has. The nitrogen and phosphorus about a quarter, and potassium's about a third. Total solids to 2%. And the Greater Wellington Regional Council now say that 1 cow or 10 sheep is 1 cow equivalent. So all the money we paid was for 6.2 cows. That was our first lot of effluent from our first day of milking. It's not a lot of sheep, but because we didn't have our resource consent, we were sweeping our yard, picking up the solids, putting it in a wheelbarrow, and then washing down really carefully. And every 10, 11 days, we were getting the truck to come, the effluent truck, come and take it away and spread it somewhere where they had consent. So that was our first day first day of milking. That's how much effluent was on there after the sheep have gone off. And it's a very stressful yard. And we do 4 weeks we wean, but the girls keep their lambs, and the lambs come in and then just go out when mum's gone out. Yeah. So what are the costs? This really hurt. The shed itself really hurt, but this hurt because I didn't have any idea it was going to cost this much. And I'm sure some of you can do it cheaper, and hopefully you can, because I'm giving you all this information. There's a question 5D in the Regional Council application forms, and you cannot do that one yourself. You have to get an expert, someone who's verified, certified, and I wasn't, so you have to pay to get them to do it. And it's all about having the plan and the effluent discharge, blah, blah, blah. We got quoted $3,500 to do that by somebody in Masterton, because they said, but we've got to do all the calculations, and you'll need this and you'll need that. Actually, all the calculations are done by what you can get online. So S-maps about your property, online. All the dairy effluent calculator, online. So everything you need to do that is online. So really negotiate with that person who's going to write up that little bit that they have to do. The pumps and sprinklers, the extra tank for storage in case of the tsunami coming up the river. And, you know, there's another $3,000. You will need more, obviously, if you've got more sheep. We haven't. Pumps and sprinklers, $10,000. And by then I was like, phew, okay, I've just about made it. And then you have to get it installed. The Sparky, I mean, they had to make a box. I was like, I can make a box. But everything had to be made. And we've got switches so that if we have power fluxes, that it doesn't, get messed up. But this is a very FUNAR flash system, and once the 10,000 litre tank is full and you want it on the paddock, it turns automatically on. If there's a problem, it won't turn on, and it'll let you know by a flashing beacon. So in that regard, we have future-proofed our effluent discharge system for the next generation, I think. The on-farm benefits are obvious. You know, it's fertiliser saving. It's really good to get it out in your paddocks. But at the rate we're putting it out, I said to the regional council, my husband can pee faster than that. And I'm sure he's got more stuff in there that's better for the property. But it's better that it's out there. You've got an improved soil condition for the addition of organic matter. And in the long run, it's going to cost you less than having it taken away. So you are doing yourself a service in the long run. So this is probably when I get a bit preachy, because I have worked for MPI, and I can see you all going like this now. I worked for MPI for 5 years, and I now work for MB. So a lot of the regulations and things that we have to deal with, I know from the other side. So don't moan, because we have to deal with that shit too. So it's concentrated nutrients can go into the waterways, and that's our biggest risk. And it's not just a risk for our products. I mean, 70% of our merchandise exports are from the primary industries. So we can't stuff up our soil. We haven't got that much of it, and we've got less in the Wairarapa than most, I'd say. But the other key thing for me is this dirty dairying. It could easily turn around and affect us as well. It had a huge impact on our external markets for the dairy industry, and it was really not reported well. And it's like everything, you know, a little bit of bad news and they'll grab hold of it and they'll make a big deal about it. But we could easily get sucked into this as well if we're not careful. A key driver for this all the rules that are coming in is it's going to be one of our biggest issues in the future, and not just for New Zealand. I think it'll be for all countries. And I think one of the issues for me when I started looking at this resource consent document was it was like, yeah, but come on, I've got 62 sheep, and you know, what's the effluent? But it's the fact that the neighbours have got, across the road, they've got 300 cows, and then the neighbour down the road has got another 600 cows, and so we're all doing that, and then the effects are obviously additive. So it's got to be a farmer-by-farmer approach, and I've got the Freshwater Reform Program website there to check, because there's some really good documentation out there about how we are really screwing up our rivers. Councils have to account for all water takes. So even though, you know, we hate them and we have to pay our rates, they actually have to account for what's going in and what's coming out. In Wairarapa, we have the conjunctive water management recognises that the water on top and the water below are connected. And when you think about it, that's not rocket science. So they're fundamentally linked, and we really have to understand what we're doing with them. I don't know if any of you have ever seen this. It's a really good research that's done by Landcare every year, and it's about 3,000 people over a period of 4 months, I think, December, or maybe a bit more, looked at what are the opportunities for the rural communities. And the things that stick out: irrigation, water, production, lamb and farming, and the challenges: water, environment and compliance. And that's this year's rural decision makers. So all the things that we talk about are in what everybody's thinking about. So it's complex to do the resource consent for your effluent. It's really painful, but you can do it, and pretty much you can do everything yourself. Go to the Facebook page. I try and load everything on there you need. It's good shit, so put it on your paddocks. And don't mess with the rules, as you will spoil it for all. And I think for our economy, for our business, for this lovely new industry going forward, I think we've got the opportunity to really do it right. And yeah, I've got this saying that I leave a legacy, not a liability. Thank you. I did have our Facebook page, but now it's me, and that's not good.
Thank you, Liz,
Okay.
for being so entertaining and open as well. If we can get that Facebook page up, that'd be great.
Yeah, that should be the next one. there. Duncroft Limited.
Any questions for Liz?
Oh. Good.
Okay, easy done. Another round of applause for Liz, please, guys. Next, I'll welcome to the stage Nick Morrison of PPL Industries. Nick was at pains to point out to me this morning he's not a Jaffa, even though he lives in Auckland. He's from a farm in Golden Bay, went to Lincoln University, and very at home in the rural environment. Nick, all yours.
Good morning, everyone. I'm the General Manager at PPP Industries, and hopefully we can get ourselves going here. But just to let everyone know that PPP Industries, we specialise as in-feed systems for dairy farmers, but we also do them for people who are milking goats and sheep. The company's been around for a long time, and when we started off, we didn't specialise in in-shed feed systems for dairy farmers. We started off as a company inside a large poultry operation in Tuakau, Bromley Park Hatcheries, and we actually automated feeding and watering for that intensive operation. And then in the in the late 60s, we put our first feed system into a farmer in Akaka, which is just west of Pukekohe. So that was in 67, and since there, well, we've only progressed. And some years we've been extremely busy, and this year's not going to be a particularly busy year for us in the dairy industry. And fluctuations, we can do anything from 150 systems in a season, probably down to something like this year, which is probably going to be around about 30 feed systems. And that's just the nature of the business that we're in, like everyone who's in agriculture. I'll just make sure I've got this. There we are. Probably I started at PPP in 1996 as the general manager, and in 2001 I bought the majority shares of the owners, which were Bromley Park Hatcheries. And one of the things that I tried to do when I started at PPP, where we were 80% poultry, and I wanted to try and diversify the company more into other business. And one of the things, I guess, we did have feed systems, but the company didn't really put a lot of emphasis on that until we actually made a change in ownership structure. And so the first feed system we put into a goat farm was actually in Awapuni, into a rotary shed. And sort of since then, we've done more and more of them. And this is just a recent, recent installation. This is about 5 years old, into a rotary shed. I had to put the PPP logo where it is because there's a milking company's logo there, which might have sort of conflicted with Laval. So, so politically correct. We have been tied up with a number of sheep milking operations in the country, from down south, which we put a system in there in about 2008. That's in Antara. We've also just recently completed last season a delivery system into the Landcorp operation in Taupo, and there's a few other operations that we've also put feed systems into. And the interesting thing is that, when you're dealing with the dairy industry, you've got a cow that eats, probably a minimum amount of feed is about 0.5 kg, and there's probably not too many farmers who are feeding down to that sort of level. But once you start getting into the smaller animals, like sheep and goats, you've got to actually try and reduce that amount down. And you're always trying to, cost is always a real crucial thing in the agri industry. So we try to utilise the same gear to get those smaller amounts down for the sheep and goats. And typically with our standard system, we can get down to about 250 grams per animal, but we've got to split a dispenser 2 ways to get that. Or like what we've done here down in Southland is we've got a double auger line, so we can go as low as 60 grams per animal. But of course, when you get equipment that can be more precise, you then have an extra cost. and they just go hand in hand. You've just got to work out, how much feed you're going to save by giving out small amounts of feed. And our feed systems handle anything, whether it's whole grain maize or barley or wheat or kibbled maize, etc. We even handle PKE. That's not that you'd be feeding that to your sheep, but it's certainly a product that's given us lots of challenges. So our equipment is very robust. This is in a rotary system in the Waikato for goats, but we have a similar one on the western side of Lake Taupo for sheep with our dispenser. Through a dispensing system like this here, we have a main auger line coming from a silo into the shed, and you'll actually see that with this dispenser here, we can actually get very accurate amounts out. And we've actually had to refine that more as farmers want us to give out smaller amounts rather than sort of getting down to somewhere near sort of 400 to 500 grams. This here is in another shed whereby we actually can bring feed into the shed and dispense it out. But then we also have a mineral dispenser, and this is this here, and this will go extremely low. We recommend we can go down to about 20 grams, but we've got farmers who are quite happy with that we can go down to 10 to 15 grams. And, one of the crucial things that we've always tried to point out to farmers is that, if you can go out and buy your grain at the cheapest price, then you can actually add in the additives that you want rather than actually getting a feed company to formulate it, which will actually be expensive to be done. This here is a herringbone system, an inline herringbone system. It's a bit simpler than what a rotary dispenser is sitting on the platform. And basically what we're doing here is as the feed comes through the auger line, through here, we're actually putting a little bit of minerals in on top here. So we can go down to about 20 grams with our standard system per kg of feed. Not that you'll be feeding a kg of feed to your sheep. Here's just another system in a rotary shed with just the one auger line in for a rotary, of course. And just before I finish on the feed system, sometimes people say, well, why do you want to feed your animals inside the shed? And typically one of the reasons we've found why people want to feed in the shed is it's an opportunity to give an expensive concentrate to your animals. It is all regulated, so every animal is going to get the same amount. If you're trying to feed out in the paddock, obviously the greedier animals will eat more than what say the meeker animals will. But also you have to be careful of overfeeding some products because you'll have issues with acidosis, etc. So, our systems are totally automated. So all you've really got to do, like in a rotary shed, you just got to make sure there's grain or feed in the silo. And in a herringbone shed, we can sort of totally automate that in a sense where you press a button, or if you've got our simpler system where you've got a pull handle, we can make that mechanically operated as well. So by having control on your feed, by reducing your labour cost, by feeding in the shed, but also knowing that every animal is going to get a certain amount of feed, you can control your costs. And if you look at the dairy industry at the moment, the guys who are milking the cows, one of their constraints at the moment is a lot of guys have got feed systems and the cost of feed is reasonably expensive. But that feed cost is coming back down, and we're finding that farmers are feeding only a small amount of feed. But also the critical thing with the feed system is that when you have a poor start to a season because it's wet and cold, you can actually start up your feed system. And then once you've got the grass in front of you, then you can actually shut it down slowly. And then once you get into, if you're in a region where you do get dry summers, then you can actually incrementally increase slowly the feed to your animals. It's just a very easy way to manage things. I know that one of the biggest problems in the dairy industry is sometimes getting the right labour. And typically when you've got an automated feed system in a shed, it makes that job very, very easy, and it's not dependent on labour. There's other things that we do within the greater dairy industry and the sheep industry. We also manufacture a sheep dipping machine. Now this allows you to control fly and external parasites like lice, etc. So this is our new machine, which we launched last year, and it's an electronic eye that activates rather than a mechanical system that we have been using for probably the last 20 years, or manufacturing for the last 20 years. We also do automated calf rearing systems, and Ag Research has one of our systems, so they can actually record everything that the lambs that they're doing these trials on are actually consuming on a daily basis. The system that we get is a German system, and it's one of the largest selling systems through Europe, but it can individually feed animals. Urban are trying to come up with a system a little bit simpler, whereby there's more of an ad lib system, but the system that they have here it records and only will feed out so much. What it does basically is either warms the whole milk and feeds that to an animal on an individual basis, or actually mix powder automatically as well and feed that to the lambs. We go as far as doing great big systems. This is a recent install we've done in Taupo for people who are going to have big operations, going to use a large amount of feed, and they actually want to mill their own feed, because the cheapest source of feed for you, if you want to mill it, is to buy the whole grain, you mill it, and these guys here, they're a reasonably large operation, but this silo here will hold about 300 tonnes of maize. That's a PKE silo there. That silo there is holding the milled product. We use a Danish Skjold disc mill, which is considered probably the best mill for milling grain for the livestock industry. We were talking about, when you feed animals, there's one issue, and that's the effluent. And unfortunately, I believe our machine's probably far too expensive for the previous speaker, because our smallest machine that can do about 8,000 litres an hour probably costs about $18,000. So it's a shovel is probably the best for it. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for your professional consideration in your presentation. Now, we're going to keep moving on with the schedule, but what I would encourage you to do, if you have some questions for Nick, he does have a trade display just out in the back there, closer to the lunch area. So I really invite you to talk to Nick. Gentlemen, and thank you once again. Next on stage, we have Emma Oliver, National Sales and Marketing Manager from StockX. She's going to talk to you a little bit about online sheep trading.
Thank you, Rowan. Good morning, everybody. Just plug me in. Throw everything on. Sorry. Just think. How do I get that to there? Sorry. How do I get that to there? Right. Just while that's connecting. So yes, I am Emma Oliver. I'm the Sales and Marketing Manager for a recently launched company called StockX, which is based in Havelock North in Hawke's Bay. We launched in September of last year, so we're very, very new. Keep talking. So a bit of background on us. We've got two founding members, both based from Hawke's Bay. One is Andrew Russell from Turnanui. He's a farmer and has some other ag industry involvement as well. And the other one is a ex-farmer and livestock consultant, John Cannon, who is also based in Hawke's Bay. Approximately 2 years ago, a share offer was put out, and we have 45 farmer shareholders based across the east coast of the North Island, stretching from Gisborne through to the Wairarapa. We've just spent the last 7 days in the South Island tripping around and ending up at Wanaka Show, and they were a little bit annoyed that we hadn't offered it to the South Island. We hadn't expected it to go so viral so fast, so that was the answer to them. We are farmer owned. Our whole team, we've got a team of 5 in Havelock North currently, and we all have ag industry backgrounds from farming through to livestock transport. I've spent the last 6.5 years in red meat processing, the last 3.5 with Craig Hickson in Hastings.
Sorry, just having some issues.
So what we are, StockX is an online farmer exchange. People say, oh, you're just a website. Well, we're actually not. We look after the whole transactional facility of farmers selling livestock direct to other farmers. We look after the banking function. We do all the sale and purchase agreements and have full transparency enabled for farmers selling through to each other. One of the important things of our platform is the price discovery.
I'll have to
Sorry. One of the important things with us is creating price discovery because we are a farmer-to-farmer model and where farmers have to set a price. If you're a seller, you go in and give a price indication that you'd like to receive for your stock and then it's up to private negotiation between the buyer and the seller or the potential buyer to negotiate those prices going forward. We have no intermediaries, so we're not livestock agents. We have a function available on our site for livestock agents to trade through our site. They can't sell because we don't want any double commissions being added, but they can definitely purchase for their clients through our site. In less than 5 months, we've got over 700 active users from Kaitaia down to Bluff. Very predominant East Coast, but that is literally because we are East Coast based. A few of the things that I'll show you today is we'll go onto our website and show you exactly how everything runs. Do you need me to click my thing in? It's no strings attached, it's completely transparent, so the buyer and the seller can see the full contact details of the person who is listing the livestock for sale. And if an offer is put on that livestock, the seller can see exactly who's wanting to purchase their stock and make direct communications. There's no strings attached in terms of the platform. You're right. There's no strings attached in terms of the platform. If the seller puts a line of stock up for sale, and for whatever reason they decide not to sell that line of stock, they might be sold externally, they can pull that at any time. There's no contracts that are binding that listing to the site, and likewise they don't have to accept an offer on the site either. So hence a bit of a difference between TradeMe and it's an open tender platform, not an auction. So a farmer can go in and put an offer on a line of stock and then change their mind later on and withdraw that offer until the point that it's accepted. The other things that we do is we hold a secure payment platform and banking function. So the banking function is held in a secure trust account separate from StockX operational account. So I can put my tablet, I can connect my thing. One moment.
Anything.
Thank you. Get rid of that.
I'm sorry, I'm having problems.
So why can't we go?
Probably should have tested this earlier.
Works on every other thing that we do. I'll just keep going. So we hold a secure banking function. So for example, if a farmer is to place an offer on a line of livestock, the offer is accepted by the seller after negotiation or no negotiation with the buyer. Within an email is sent immediately to the buyer to say that their livestock offer has been accepted, and they're expected to pay into a holding trust account within 24 hours the value of the livestock sale. What happens there is we then send an automatic communication to the seller to say we have trust held in fund, and whether they're cleared or not, it's up to the seller as to when they decide to truck the stock. What happens from there is transport's negotiated, the stock is received by the buyer. The listing information that hopefully I'll get to show you, if not, come and see me later, acts as a warranty. So we have the most comprehensive livestock listing classification system currently in New Zealand. The guys designing the system have spent the last 5 years analysing what's out there and available to the public, and we believe we've got the best system currently available. We are working with the likes of beef and lamb to develop an actual livestock classification system, because we're the only country in 13 meat exporting countries that do not have an official livestock classification. And I've worked in processing for the last 6.5 years, and some people's definition of prime stock is not other people's definition of prime stock. So we're working really hard on that. Let's see, can we get this to click over?
I haven't been able to get it up for you, but I've got it up on a different computer.
Here we go. So how do I operate that? Okay.
If you want to talk from the side here, you can give you a remote if you really want to. Across there.
Oh, sweet. Okay.
Tough day in the office, Dan.
That's right. Good old technology. Righty ho. We're away. Right, so what this is, can everyone hear me? Is that, am I out of the way? Yeah. Is it sweet? Okay, so this is the landing page for our website. This is a really good example, actually. These beef listings went up overnight, and they haven't got any photos and imagery around them. But I will tell you that they've already sold. So there's offers on this stock, and this transaction will go through later today. So the landing page, stockx.co.nz, currently has 8 listings on it. That's all that's visible from the main page. But as you can see, just right there, the difference between those listings that do have imagery and those that don't. Oh, I'm not going to go back into this. I've just got to take 2 seconds to log in and register my information because it's a registration page. Yeah. Okay. That's right. I'll just go and talk to it. That's all good. Okay. Disasters. That's right. So one thing, what would have taken probably too much time to get sorted out was we have a validation process in terms of, I don't need that now, in terms of making sure that every registered entity, so all the 700 plus entities that are registered with us currently have been validated. So every bid that goes on a line of livestock, you know it's a secure bid, you know that they're an actual trading entity. We have to do cross-references. So for example, if a manager goes in and registers a property and they are not associated with that trading entity from a business perspective, from a director's perspective, we have to cross-check and ring the owner to make sure that that person is validated to trade on their behalf. So that's great security for the seller in terms of knowing that those bids are going to actually come through. What it does is sellers go in and create, as I say, a comprehensive listing. So there's photo and video opportunity. One of the other key things that we offer is the opportunity to upload performance documentation. So one of the things that's going to come out of this, and the process has already started, is we have sheep, beef, deer and dairy listings currently. We haven't fully scoped out the sheep milking industry. We've got a very, very expansive listing classification for dairy, which is what I was going to show you today in terms of getting a bit of feedback from you guys into what the requirements are. But from some of the notes that I've taken out, condition scoring is key. So our current model for listing is forward, medium and light. We haven't gone into numbered of body condition scores because they're a little bit indecisive and some people's classifications aren't quite what they should be. So lambing percentage obviously is important. The weight gain was of interest to us. We're working with some companies at the moment to put up some really comprehensive weight gain data, and we've actually managed to fast track some of that data coming out of these technology companies, which is fantastic, and it will auto-link through to our site. And I suppose the key is the use of StockX is marketing what you have, and it's creating a listing and a profile against your property or your trading entity that will create an increased need to buy or want to buy from your property in particular. Matching off the other side of that is a wanted to buy process. So there's livestock for sale listings currently and livestock wanted. So the livestock wanteds are quite expensive and actually outweigh the listings currently. And we have a whole pile in the background that haven't been put up publicly that we have buying orders. So that wanted to buy, as a seller, you can go in there and see who's actually looking and currently on the market to purchase. You can match off a listing that matches exactly what their wanted to buy is if you've got that stock, or you can just click into their trading entity information, get their contact details and ring them direct. Against that is an alert profile, whereas you can create a number of alerts that will match off and send you direct information to your phone or your email anytime. So you don't actually have to end up, if you're buying, looking at our website at all to see what listings are up. It'll tell you what is there when you want it, and those can be turned off and on. So just some key messages. Going forward, we're in the process of design and development. As I say, we're 5 months old and we're doing continual development with different producer groups throughout the country. We're doing targeted communications for those groups. So one of the enhancements we will be doing is enabling the likes of yourselves to go in and offer stock only to an internal group or externally as well. We're working on stud stock platforms, prime stock platforms, transport integrations, and real-time market data. And people say to us, what do we charge? We're a 2.5% commission, and that's across all platforms. So, and that only comes from the sale. So it's free to register, free to list, wanted to buy and for sale, and the only transaction fee that comes in is on a confirmed sale from the seller. So I do have my tablet, and I can show anyone who's interested the background of the site. And I do apologise for the technical glitch today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emma. She was a late addition to the program. Obviously, Digby's not here, so she did very well. Thank you to Daniel for your efforts as well. Ian Carr of Ritek, please make your way to the stage and present.
Good afternoon. So, Ritek, 15 years ago, instead of getting into sheep milking, I decided to set up Ritek, and very interesting, yesterday the sessions on creating the demand and making sure that you've got a market that's willing to pay, and I think that applies to any business really, and no good just having the same old generic stuff that anyone can supply, or having something that maybe technology's moved on and there's not a requirement for it. So at Ritek, we like to offer solutions that have added features and offer greater benefits. And instead of investing in that effluent system with the resource consents, invested in a sewing machine and associated equipment, and we've got acknowledged expertise in making harnesses, so anything that links into that, maybe bar bras or other similar things that are specific needs for the sheep milking industry, we're certainly keen to talk about those. So in terms of putting the the sewing machine to use, there's a few things that we're harnessed. Last season we brought out a prolapse bearing harness, which is something that's quite common in the Northern Hemisphere, using a harness quite different to the one we have, but and I wondered whether it would sell here in New Zealand, but after 1 year, it was a challenge keeping up with demand. We also have a harness for mothering on for restraint, one that you can put on behind our mating mark harness to turn rams into teasers instead of vasectomising. And just a bit more detail on some of them. The mating mark harness, I should say, a big part of our business, over half of it is export, and really built on the back of mating mark, which is the market leader in many countries, New Zealand, Australia, the UK, the US, well, heading that way. So that was their base technology. We actually had a request from Chile whether there was a way to, particularly aimed at the nomadic sheep flocks, that where they had the rams running with the ewes year round, but they wanted to have more control over lambing. Was there something we could develop that would enable the rams to be run year round, but the lambing to be controlled? So the model there is Hercules the ram from Osorno, and he wore that harness for 6 weeks, and that was our first prototype, and we haven't actually sold any in Chile yet, but we've certainly sold a lot around the rest of the world. And the prolapse harness, as I say, there is similar technology, if you like, in the Northern Hemisphere. Modification we did was with using the tubing there for exerting the pressure on the vulva. And then we have one inspired from a 2 per ewe project in the Wairarapa, where they were using the mating mark harnesses to restrain the ewes, which is not quite what they were designed for, and had some issues, you could say. So that harness enables the ewe to be tethered to a fence or a rail, and if she's still bunting in that, you can put the neck strap around the rail to stop her bunting, let it off when she's a bit friendlier. We also do distribute other companies' products, and these include the Primatech range of animal health applicators. We also do a Masterline range out of Europe, which offers a few added things, metal barrels on vaccinators combined with the plastic handles. You can put bottle mounts, as in the picture there, have a bottle mounted on the back, so it has advantages in terms of putting big packs on and weight bearing on you, and not getting knocked around like you can do with bottle mounts on the front. It has provision, put a marker on there so you can know which markers you treat, know which ones are treated. And so we're all about looking at new solutions. We have a needle-free injection system that's in use in a conveyor in South Otago. We did 4,500 hoggets in pretty quick time at a rate of over 800 an hour, and they were getting tagged as well with the automatic tagger. That's a tagger, a system which can take, they can either be electronic, visual, or you can alternate visual and electronic on a strip if you're wanting to double tag for greater security of identity. And that's pretty much Rurtec. Certainly, as they're very interested in any particular needs there may be in the sheep milking industry that still require solutions. And as I say, we have a sewing machine there that's ready to go to work if the need is there. Thank you.
We're almost there, guys. We'll keep moving. We'll invite Sam Peterson, slight change in the agenda, to come to the stage. Thank you. Sam.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Is that going? Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, it is afternoon. Cutting into your lunchtime. So nutrition is a good topic for lunchtime. It's going to be a hard act to follow home, but the point is that we do have a different situation in New Zealand. We can grow grass. They've got deserts. So I'm going to be talking to you about a slightly different approach to nutrition. Basically, for many of you, if you go and look, you'll find that the literature on sheep nutrition is pretty complicated. There are different nutrition systems used in different countries. They have different feedstuffs available. They use different breeds, and they have different management and production systems. And so it does make it really complicated for a novice looking for that information. So I'm going to present a simplified outline. I'm going to base it on energy requirements only, and I'm going to do that because basically our New Zealand pasture has more than enough protein in it, and I'm going to be talking about pasture-based systems. And I'm going to be talking about nutrition during lactation only. But do remember that nutrition during the rest of the year is important, and certainly body condition score coming into lambing is going to have a big effect on the milk yield of your sheep. One of the biggest things you have to take into account in sheep or any nutrition is the feed intake limitation. You might think, if I feed my sheep more, I'm going to get more milk. But the correlation between milk yield and feed intake is often very poor. Published data show correlations anywhere between 0.2 and 0.8. And basically that's because some sheep are unable to consume the amount of feed that's required to meet the energy requirements for milk production. They can't physically stuff enough in. If you're going to be aiming at trying to get 600 litres of milk out of your sheep, you're not going to do it by feeding them grass. That's what Heinz told us. We'll need to have concentrates as well. There's some data from Avondo and Lutri. They showed that a 75 kilogram East Friesian had an effective or expected intake of 2.5 kilograms of dry matter per day. Well, it's fine if you can get it into them in a high energy content, but if you're going to feed them 2.5 kilograms of roughage, then they're not going to be able to eat 2.5 kilograms, and they won't be able to produce on it. So the point is, can animals eat the mutt? Can animals eat how much you want them to eat in order to produce the amount that you expect? The point is, if you use a higher digestibility diet with a higher energy content, then they will be able to eat more of it. But you will still run into limits. The highest producers will certainly not be able to eat if you feed them a high fibre diet. Small animals, obviously, lower digestive tract capacity will also be a problem. So we expect that animals are likely to run into negative energy balance. And those of you who have heard about the dairy cow industry or know about the dairy cow industry, we expect our dairy cows to be in negative energy balance for weeks. And Heim told us that we can try to avoid that in sheep by feeding them higher energy, certainly earlier on in the lactation season. So the calculations that you make may be based upon actual milk yields, but you may not be able to account for their inability to eat as much as you would like them to. Calculations of energy requirements are based on a simple formula which really says the energy required equals the amount of energy required for maintenance plus their activity. A lot of the international stuff, publications, is based on animals that are housed. So if you add grazing activity, add about 15%. Lactation is going to be the most expensive thing that happens in a sheep's life. Plus, you have to allow for any live weight change. You can get more complicated formulae if you wish to by going to MPI, have a publication with very complicated formula, and also Overseer has more complicated formula if you want to do that. This is a publication by Candid et al. From 2001. I've just adapted it. They had it in kilocalories and megacalories. I've adapted it, but this is basically what you need to add up. The cost of maintenance is the live weight times that value. The metabolic live weight is based on the area of the skin of the animal. Grazing activity, you can calculate the requirements for lactation based upon the components of the milk and the cost of making each of them, and then you have to allow for live weight gain or live weight loss. If you go to the NRC, which many of us nutritionists do, or many nutritionists do, they actually, their latest version of the sheep requirements doesn't give any of those values. They basically said there's not enough data out there to do it. But they do give examples which you can work through. So this is an example, a 70 kilogram ewe in the first 6 to 8 weeks losing 60 grams a day, suckling twins, requires a diet with 10 megajoules of ME per kilogram of dry matter. And they suggest, for example, that you might do that with 35% concentrate and 65% forage. And that's the kind of thing that we probably are likely to end up doing in New Zealand. That would be having to feed 2.8 kilograms of dry matter, which is about 4% of live weight. Now, 4% of live weight, some animals won't be able to eat, and some will. That's going to be really interesting. Or 27.6 megajoules of energy. Another source, Jordan is a professor in America who's written a really good paper on nutrition in sheep. He says that the NRC value, those examples, are too high, and he comes up with 24.6 megajoules for the 70 kilogram sheep doing the same thing. So if you want to formulate a diet, select the major feed type that you're going to have available to you. Determine the nutrient and energy content of that diet. Determine the ME requirements of your ewes, how much energy you're going to need based on how much you expect them to produce, and then you can calculate the amount of feed needed. And of course, when you find that the amount of dry matter required exceeds their ability to eat that amount, you're going to have to boost the energy content of that diet. And that's where balancing the ration comes in. Now, flash nutritionists will use simultaneous equations, but you can go back to examples like this one with 35% concentrate and 65% forage, and you can up the concentrate if they're still not able to eat that amount. I'm just going to talk to you about what options are going to be in New Zealand. Spring pasture has 11.5 to 12.5 megajoules of ME per kilogram of dry matter, but in the summer that's going to go down to 9 or 10, and you can see that they're not going to be able to eat enough food at 9 megajoules of ME per kilogram of dry matter for production. And even the highest quality pasture will eventually be limited by the voluntary feed intake of the sheep. So that will require supplementing. You will have to supplement your sheep with high energy concentrates. Pasture's not going to be enough. You don't have to stick to pasture. Work has been done in New Zealand on herb and clover mixtures, which have higher digestibility. Hutton did some work at Massey, where they used chicory, plantain, and white and red clover as a herb mix, and they compared it with ryegrass dominant sword. We only milk Romney use at Massey. We don't have any flash ones. But they got milk yields of over 3 litres versus 2.5 litres at day 21, and they published the whole curve so you can look at it. And they got better, heavier lambs and better body condition score. So if you go with herbs and clovers, you're going to be better off than if you just use pasture. Condensed tannins, plants with condensed tannins have been shown to increase milk yields in sheep. Bird's foot trefoil or Lotus caniculatus is something that some pastures, is something that some of you will know about. And at Massey, we have shown that increased milk yield by 21% over ryegrass white clover pastures without affecting the VFI, voluntary feed intake. So it's increasing the efficiency of milk production. Ken Guinea spoke to you last year, and he was unable to be here this year. So I'm telling you a little bit about what he would have told you if he'd been here. He would have told you about this research that he did, where they milked basically unselected Dorset ewes. They had 2 levels of nutrition during pregnancy. resulting in a difference in live weight of 14 kilograms and big differences in body condition score. And then they had 3 levels of nutrition during a 6-week lactation. So if you're 2 by 3 factorial experiment here, we're giving you 6 different groups. All used lost between 3 and 12 kilograms of live weight, or half to two body condition scores during their lactation. I'm not going to go into the results, I'm just going to go straight to the conclusions. The point is that the efficiency of energy used for milk production increases as live weight loss decreases. So if you can minimize the live weight loss of your animals by feeding them higher concentrates during that period, you'll increase the efficiency. Ken recommends that body condition at 3 should be what you aim at for lambing, and 2.5 during machine milking. And really, he says you should be aiming to offer them pasture with 3,500 kilograms of dry matter per hectare for machine milking. So my recommendation is that we should do what we do best in New Zealand, and that is grow grass or other pastures or crops. You're going to find what grows best in your district and your circumstances and what feed there is available, and then you're going to adapt it to your use. If you're using pasture, then you need to feed the highest quality pasture you can grow. You need to offer over 3,500 kilograms of dry matter per hectare and only graze it down to 2,500. So this is, you're really shoving them the really good stuff. Grow specialist crops according to what you can grow in your district, in your soil types, and with your rainfall and your management system. So look at lucerne. Of course, lucerne is going to be grown in a lot of places in New Zealand for dairy sheep. Lotus is another option, but it doesn't have the dry matter per hectare that you might want. Herb clover mixes such as chicory, plantain, and red clover are good options to look at. But basically, after that, you're still going to have to supplement with high energy concentrates if you want to get those high milk yields. The next 2 speakers are 2 of my masterate students, and they're going to tell you very briefly about what they are going to do for their research. They're going to be looking at the lamb raising systems. 2 big North Island farms are going to be raising 10,000 lambs in the coming year, and that's a whole new thing for an industry that has got to, we've heard about the bobby calf issue last year, and so the thought is here, just let's be a bit prepared in looking at the lamb raising systems and learning more about them.
Hi, I'm Amber Jensen, and I'm looking at starting a research project on comparing different lamb rearing systems. So a large amount of milk is lost when lambs are kept with their mothers until weaning. So there's a potential loss of profit, and some operations avoid this by removing lambs from ewes soon after birth, but this does create a set of problems. So there are 3 main systems that I'll try and compare with respect to lamb growth, nutrition, morbidity, and mortality. And these are where lambs are removed within a day and artificially reared, where lambs remain with ewes while the ewes are being milked, and where ewes raise lambs until weaning and then begin milking. So growth rates are important because it means lambs will reach an acceptable weaning weight sooner. This is important in keeping costs down, especially in artificial rearing systems. And for any ram and ewe lambs that are going to be sold, they can reach a higher weight by the time they're due to be sold. And slow growth rates can mean a longer amount of time is taken before these lambs will reach an acceptable slaughter weight, and it is also associated with increased lamb mortality. So a lamb with a high growth rate is more efficient than a lamb with a low growth rate, and the pre-weaning period is where the greatest growth rate should be achieved due to feeding energy-dense milk and any concentrates as well. Fast growth rates are the target because a faster lamb grows, it will eat less total feed to reach the target weight, and there will be less feed required for maintenance over this time. So it costs less in both time and money to raise a lamb with a high growth rate, making it more efficient. Previous overseas studies in East Frisians and Awasis have reached conflicting conclusions about which system has higher growth rates and lower mortality rates. And in a New Zealand study of Poll Dorset lambs, artificial rearing was found to have lower growth rates compared to lambs kept with their mothers for 16 hours a day. But at present, there's few studies of current dairy breeds in New Zealand, especially lamb growth rates during the pre-weaning period. So this is what I'll be doing my research on. Thank you.
G'day, I'm Brad Neeper. I'm one of Sam Peterson's other master's student, and I will be looking into behavioural changes and welfare implications of different rearing systems throughout New Zealand. So first off, my research is going to involve going to multiple different milking farms throughout New Zealand and looking at the rearing systems. So I'll hopefully be looking at 3 different types of weaning systems, which the lamb taken away at 1 to 2 days, a mixed, which has been explained already, and weaning at 30 days. This is because at this current time in New Zealand, intensive sheep milking farming is becoming more and more intensive, and the farmers are wanting to take their lambs away earlier and earlier. So I want to see if there are any more behavioural issues and differences between them, between lambs taken away earlier compared to lambs taken away at 30 days or in a mixed. There are actually welfare implications that have been noted, but nothing too serious. So naturally, there's a mother-young bond created when the lambs are born, and this is maintained for several months when the mother looks after the lamb. She provides them with nutrition, passive immunity through the colostrum, and she also helps them learn different behaviours while they're growing up. So when they're taken away, usually at 2 days in New Zealand, it actually creates a lot of emotional and nutritional stress which can be exerted onto the lambs and have different behavioural changes. So quickly, this is just a few studies that have shown different behavioural changes and other changes. There has been different remarks on bleating in the lambs. So some cases have shown that lambs bleat less, while others show that they bleat more. So I want to look into which one's really happening in New Zealand. Suckling of the navel and scrotum has been noted as an abnormal behaviour in some of the lambs. Elevated cortisol levels in artificially reared lambs occurs earlier on, and which can have an effect on the immune response, so high susceptibility to diseases. And then along with a difference in social interaction, the lambs form a bond with their other pairs instead of their mother, which is seen as a good thing, but is considered unnatural. And there is also problems with nutritional stress, with lambs not actually being able to take on the commercial milk provided or milk replacer earlier on, which can lead to decreased growth rates. But as Amber said, that there is actually proof that that may not be the case. So that's what I'll be looking into, and thank you.